I'm here to talk to you about stress and the gut. More specifically, how it affects the gut. So when we're under stress, we release a hormone called cortisol. And cortisol is a pretty big hormone to be flooded in your system. When we're under stress, that cortisol level will increase. Now, simply put, what happens to the gut here is neurologically that puts us in a stress response, and that stress response is perceived as danger. And what happens to the gut at that point is that it slows, stops. And that's because the nervous system is saying, we don't need the gut to work here, we need to run. And so my energy, or fight, we need to put my energy into the muscles and the tissue surrounding it. So everything around the gut slows very heavily. Part of that stress response is your sympathetic nervous system, which is part of the autonomic or the involuntary nervous system, engaging because the threat is there. My cortisol levels will increase, my adrenaline will also increase in that moment, and our vascularity in the blood supply to the nervous system, to the gut, will also reduce. So I haven't got the same output, I haven't got the same nutrients and going to the gut initially, and then also I will stop the nutrients being absorbed from the gut. Our gut is under threat when we're under threat. And the threat only comes from a perception of that. So our fight, flight, freeze response is again interpreted as danger. We interpret a danger externally, whatever that might be. And that can be a real physiological stress. There could be something that is going to put you in danger, a car's coming at me and something like that. And I need to get myself out of there. However, that stress should surpass. And in nature, we would normally return back to the parasympathetic, where we are in that state of calm and the rest and digest picks up again. The simple response here, when we are under that stress reaction, is that we perceive that threat and it continues. So humans are the only animals that can bring or make our thoughts take us into the stress response. When the stress response occurs, that's when these things happen physiologically. My gut starts to shut down, my cortisol increases, my adrenaline picks up. You know, you felt that, I'm sure, at some point when you've been under danger, your heart starts racing, and I'm going to get up and go. And they say when adrenaline kicks in, you've got the strength of 10 men. It increases your output into the external extremities to be able to force your muscles into action. Again, in a short term, that's not a problem because it's supposed to get you out of the danger. But where we perceive the threat to be longer, and that problem that we have at work is continuing, or I don't think I'm good enough kicks in, that's a threat in itself. Or I feel invalidated, I don't feel seen, I don't feel listened to, I don't feel heard, I feel lonely, I feel isolated. Anything that puts us into that danger zone will engage, just as it did, as I explained just a minute ago, with the gut changing. My hormones decrease, my permeability reduces, my ability to absorb reduces, my ability to have normal bowel movements decreases. I will change how much I'm able to breathe, and the breath is really important because it's also the understanding of how your diaphragm is your sphincter, which is the hole that closes up to the stomach. So acid reflux can be more dominant here. And people with hiatus hernias, which are this hernia that comes off where the stomach outpouches up into the diaphragm, up into that space. And it creates a little point where we can't close the sphincter. So there's this constant now acid reflux. And we have medication that's given for that, like omeprazole or lansoprazole. These are the medications that are meant to help the prevention of acid reflux becoming a problem, but it doesn't get rid of the overall problem in itself. So again, why has that happened? My stress response has increased, my breathing dynamics have changed, I'm breathing further up into my ribs, I'm not breathing down into my diaphragm, my stomach's getting contorted because it's being pulled up with the diaphragm, because that's what the hole is. So I'm now retracting into myself, and now what I'm not getting is the proper acid in my stomach being able to kill off some of the bacteria in a good way, because the acid's coming up. I'm having problems in my esophagus. That can lead into really nasty things like cancer, throat cancer. But on a minor level, you've got constant acid reflux. That's not comfortable. There's nothing nice about that. So my whole physiology changes in terms of the gut in itself. And then we have the hormonal changes that respond to that. So my nervous system initially increases in its tone. My muscles tense up. And cortisol will also increase tone in the muscle because that's what it does. When we have an injection, for example, hydrocortisone injection into the area of pain, like the shoulder or the knee, it's very common to get in medical terms now. What cortisol does is it takes away the inflammation, sure, initially, but it does that by atrophying the tissue that it's getting there. So it will eat away at the tissue. So high levels of cortisol all the time will also reduce your muscle ability, not just from the muscles that we see externally, but we also reduce the gut as well, the muscle, that smooth muscle. So cortisol will eat away slowly at us. And the longer we're in that state, the worse this situation gets. Interaction-wise with cortisol is also very much so about blood sugar regulation. When we take on food, our glucose levels are being restored in our body. And so our body is calm and it's got the natural sugars that it needs to have. However, if we take on too many glucose or we don't take on enough, then our blood sugar levels get disrupted. So we're fasting for too long. We're in starvation mode. We are overeating and we're not eating the right products. A lot of the beige food, for example. What we end up having is a state where the blood sugar levels are disrupted. So naturally what's supposed to happen is I get some food in, my glucose levels stabilize, and so too does the cortisol. My cortisol drops. So when we are hungry or we haven't eaten, we've gone too far into that, my insulin will spike. And insulin is the thing that helps to regulate the blood sugars as well. Insulin will spike. Cortisol is released at that point. And the reason cortisol is released is because there's not actually anything coming into the system, but the body needs to have glucose. The brain requires it. The whole body requires it to move, to function. That is our prime source of energy. When glucose is absent, insulin increases, cortisol increases to break down tissue. It initially starts with the muscles because the muscles contain glucose. They are the richest supply of glucose in our system. So they will break down the muscle tissue, whether that's the musculoskeletal tissue first or other tissues if it's not there. That's when we end up getting a reduction or atrophy of the muscles, but we help to regulate the glucose because the glucose comes back out. Now, if we're in a state of starvation, you look at anorexia or bulimia, for example, very, very thin, not much musculoskeletal muscle to be had, blood sugar levels aren't being regulated. And so as a result, we're constantly hungry. We've gone so far into that, it's called a catabolic state. And that is a threat in itself. So the body's always in that state of constant threat. And actually you almost feel nauseous because we don't have enough coming in, but the body is so dysregulated in its nervous system that it doesn't tolerate anything coming in. So it's too much for the body to take. On the other end of it, obesity. Again, another eating disorder. When we take on too much food, because that's also a coping strategy, right? You either don't eat or you overeat. And just on that note, part of the reason why we feel like we want to eat more when we're under stress is because it gives us a dopamine hit. Eating gives us 50% of our fill when it comes to the dopamine intake. When we've eaten, we fill up our dopamine levels by 50%. So we're never really fully satisfied because it's not 100%, it's only 50. And so we want to eat more to get that dopamine fill, to feel satiated, to feel like we're getting something that is rewarding. And so obesity can quickly incur that way if we're constantly under that coping strategy because we need to feel internally like we've got some sort of fulfillment. But it's, again, only a short-lived hit. Dopamine is there and then it's gone. So now again, my blood sugar levels are starting to constantly be under threat because guess what? Too much is coming in. Too much glucose can lead to things like diabetes, where I have too much coming into my system And what we do with that is that the insulin now that's being increased, because we're getting so much going on, the insulin's not actually able to be absorbed. So we have insulin resistance, and that takes us into type 2 diabetes. These are the kind of pathologies that can kick in with stress being high. And what happens to the gut is that it will always respond. And we have to remember as well, serotonin, which is the hormone that gives us that feeling of satiety and fulfillment and love and just a sense of peace. 97% of the receptors of serotonin live in our gut. So if our gut's unhappy, we're pretty much unhappy too. And that can come in forms of depression. That can come in forms of anxiety. We don't have to be there, but it certainly has an impact on us. Part of the reason why we're given antidepressants. Antidepressants are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. These medications are there to flood the body with serotonin where there is the absence of it. And so you will always find some gut complications with someone who has depression. You see obese people with depression, you see anorexia or bulimia with depression. They tend to come hand in hand. And this is how pertinent it is that the gut is so linked. That's why they call it the second brain. All of those nerves around the gut are reacting and saying we're under threat. And that can just be from what we're eating. Some things to consider then when we are in this disrupted state. How do I feel with my gut? Am I regular in my bowel movements? Do I have acid reflux? Do I have IBS type symptoms? Am I getting this bloating, this inflammation that's occurring? Because quite frankly, the first thing we do when we get into a state of anxiety or any kind of threat is that we will think negatively, and that will increase inflammation in the body. My gut will react to that very quickly as that second brain. My nervous system will detect the threat. It will stop at slow motility. Anything that now comes on is dangerous. So I might get reactive as a result of that. Anxiety is often met with gut complications and gut irritability. It's not so much that you're intolerant or allergic. It's actually that I'm taking myself into a threat response and I'm reacting to that internally. So listen to the gut. It is literally speaking to you. Those sounds, those clicks and pops that you hear inside, not like the joint clicks, they're little gurgles and that go on. They tell you a story. If I'm getting big bloating, if I'm getting that acid reflux coming in, if I'm not having consistency with my bowels, these are all the stuff that we need to listen to when we're under that state of stress. What is it about that? How can I aid myself in changing this? So what is my nutrients that I'm getting actually giving me? Am I eating well? So for a bit of homework, start to listen into what your gut's telling you. Am I getting indigestion? Am I having discomfort in my bowels? Am I having any kind of issues with how I move my bowels? How regular that is? How regular is my intake of food? What is the food I'm taking on now? Another thing you can do is take on a food diary here again and just make sure what you're seeing matches up to what it is that I'm feeling. Am I actually intolerant of something? Am I allergic to something? Can you see a pattern in what the food is doing to you? In that alone could be the stress response. And am I getting problems where I might be going towards a pathology? Am I getting insulin resistance? Am I feeling fatigued? Am I feeling really lethargic? Am I getting these ups and these downs? And when I do that, what am I looking for? Am I looking for a sugar hit? Am I looking for coffee? Am I looking for something to bring me back up? Is that disrupting my sleep patterns? These are all indications of what it is that's going on in my stress response and in relationship to my gut.